The dog's last days were almost up. The German Shepherd lay motionless in the cold metal cage, with dull eyes as if accepting his fate. Today was his last day. Suddenly tonight, something unbelievable happened. That moment changed everything forever. The shelter was eerily quiet, save for the whimpers and occasional soft howls of dogs yearning for a real home. In the far corner of the main entrance, a German Shepherd named Thor lay in a rusted metal cage, his large body curled tightly into the corner, his once proud posture now hunched and vulnerable, long scars on his neck that even his long fur couldn't cover. His scars told of a painful past, a past that no one at the shelter really knew about, and probably no one cared to ask about his injuries. Thor stopped barking weeks ago, as visitors to the shelter would always shake their heads, lingering at the door of his cage for a moment, before moving on to younger, more energetic dogs. It made him realize that barking was pointless, that barking didn't bring anyone to his cage, and he was turned away over and over again, until now. Thor wasn't the kind of dog people wanted, a large, intimidating shepherd with a history of aggression. Or so his record said. The truth was, Thor wasn't aggressive. He was scared. Every raised hand reminded him of pain. Every loud noise sent shivers through his body. But no one saw that to them he was just another unadoptable dog, and now his time was almost up. That evening, as the staff cleaned up for the night, watched them quietly from his cage, his eyes once bright and alert had grown dull. He no longer hoped for a miracle. His heart had grown heavy with the weight of waiting. Tomorrow was the day his life would end. The shelter had made the decision there wasn't enough space, and Thor was deemed unfit for adoption. As the lights dimmed and the staff left for the night, the silence grew deeper. The other dogs continued to whine and bark, but Thor didn't join them instead. He let out a quiet whimper, a sound so soft it was almost imperceptible. It wasn't a cry for attention. It was a cry of resignation. But 70 miles away, someone felt that cry. Akina sat in her small apartment, aimlessly scrolling through her phone. She was a nurse who had dedicated her life to helping the elderly live happier lives in nursing homes. But lately, she had felt lost. She had always wanted to adopt a dog, but life had a way of making excuses for her. Her apartment was too small. Her hours were too long. She didn't have enough experience with challenging dogs. But that night, something pulled her back, a feeling she couldn't shake. She opened YouTube and was immediately greeted by a picture of a dog lying in a rusty iron cage. She could never forget that sad, dark face. A post from the local shelter titled, "7-year-old Thor needs a home tomorrow," or "will be euthanized?" A video that had been up for 7 days without a single like or comment. Akina had a puzzled look on her face, wondering why no one cared about this dog. She couldn't explain it, but she felt an undeniable pull. She clicked and watched for a long time. The video played over and over again. A 7-minute video of just a dog lying on the floor with a dull look in his eyes, like he had lost faith in life. Or it was a look of not caring who was watching. She whispered to herself, "Has anyone adopted him yet?" That urged her to dial the shelter's number. Only long beeps and no one answered, but she quickly switched to the messaging app. "Hi, my name is Akina. I saw your video about Thor. I know it's late, but I want to learn more about Thor. Please don't do anything until I come tomorrow, please." Akina felt her heart flutter and a little bit of fear. Maybe the fear came from the fear that Thor would die before she got to the shelter. She didn't know why she felt the urge to help this special dog, but she couldn't ignore the feeling. She set her alarm for early in the morning, but she knew that she probably wouldn't be able to sleep tonight. Back at the shelter, Thor lay still in his cage, unaware that someone somewhere had decided to fight for him. The moonlight streamed through the small barred window, casting a faint glow over his tired body. For the first time in weeks, Thor let out a deep sigh, as if some part of him knew that his story wasn't over yet. At the shelter, tonight time seemed to pass faster than usual. The staff had started their daily routine of feeding Thor, but today something was different. They gave Thor twice the usual amount of food. Perhaps this was his last meal, and to comfort him before carrying out his death sentence. Thor sat quietly in his cage as footsteps echoed through the hallway. The shelter manager, a woman named Wendy, approached his cage with a clipboard in her hand, her face apologetic. "I'm sorry, boy," she whispered. "We tried our best, but no one came for you. Maybe God is waiting for you in heaven." Thor didn't react. He had given up everything. His bright soul had dimmed under layers of disappointment and fear. Meanwhile, Akina was driving. According to Google Maps, there were only about 7 miles to the shelter. Her heart was pounding, and her mind was racing with questions. Was Thor still alive? Was he aggressive? So many questions were running through her head. It only stopped when in front of her was the old, modest building with the sign, Animal Shelter. She hurried to the entrance. Through the introduction of the security man, she went to the door of a room with a name tag on the door, Manager Wendy. Wendy was sitting in the room reviewing Thor's file one last time when she heard a knock on the door. "Please come in." She looked up in surprise to see a young woman approaching with a heavy breath. "Hi, this is Akina," she said with a slightly trembling voice. "I called and texted last night about Thor." Wendy raised her eyebrows and looked at her watch. "I'm so sorry. He's due for the euthanasia injection." Akina interrupted her, her voice firm. "Stop right there, please. I'll take him." Wendy was startled, but immediately dialed the number of the staff in charge of euthanasia. The beeping sound seemed endless. Wendy called again, but no one answered. Akina pulled Wendy's hand out of the chair. "Ma'am, take me there, please." Wendy was very cooperative. They ran as fast as horses galloping to the finish line. Running through 3 corridors, they finally saw the room in the distance with the name on the door, Euthanasia Room. In the room, the 50-year-old man, Ethan, was taking the final steps. Even though he had done this many times, the sadness was still very clear on his face. Ethan removed the needle cover. "Sorry, Thor. I'll spare you from this horrible life." Ethan brought the needle closer to Thor's neck, then heard something banging on the door, followed by a loud scream. "Stop! Stop! Please!" That startled him. When he looked up, he couldn't help but be surprised to see the manager Wendy and a young girl lying on the floor, the door wide open. "Have you given Thor his injection yet?" Wendy asked urgently. "Ma'am, as you can see, I'm about to give him an injection," Ethan replied with a puzzled face. Oh my God. It was only now that Wendy and Akina's faces relaxed. After explaining the situation to Ethan, they took Thor back to his familiar cage. Standing in front of his cage door, Wendy asked, "Are you sure? Thor is not an easy dog to handle. He has had a difficult past, and we have had major aggression issues." "I'm sure," Akina replied. Her voice was even, although her chest was shaking with anxiety. "I know what I'm doing. Please give me a chance." Akina was devastated. She looked at Thor. In real life, he was even more pathetic than in the photo. His body curled up in the corner of the cage, his head resting on his paws, and his eyes glazed over, barely registering her presence. Wendy opened the cage. She reached out carefully so as not to invade his space. "It's okay," she whispered. "She wouldn't hurt him." Thor hesitated. His body tensed, but after a long moment, he shifted slightly, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. Akina held her breath, her arms still outstretched slowly and cautiously. Thor moved towards her, his movements hesitant and uncertain, as his nose finally touched her hand. Akina felt relieved. "Good boy," she said softly. She was overwhelmed with emotion. Good boy. Wendy watched silently as her usual skepticism melted into a weak smile. Maybe this would work. As Akina led Thor out of the shelter, It didn't take long for the adoption formalities to be completed. Wendy handed Akina a file. "From this moment, Thor is yours." Thor's steps were hesitant, his body stiff, but he followed her willingly for the first time in months, the gentle rays of sunlight reflecting off his fur, bringing with them the hope of a new beginning. The ride back to Akina's small apartment was silent, except for the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle from the back seat. Thor curled up on the blanket she had laid out for him, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings through the window. His body still tense, his movements cautious, as if he couldn't quite believe what was happening. For all he knew, this could be another temporary stop, another fleeting moment before being returned to the cold metal cage. Akina kept glancing at him through the rearview mirror. Her heart ached at the sight. She wanted to say something to reassure him, but she knew words wouldn't be enough. This was a dog who had learned not to hope, not to trust. It would take more than kind words to break down the walls he had built around himself. They finally arrived. Akina parked in front of her apartment complex, an old building with a large lawn in front. She turned to Thor and said softly, "We're home." She opened the car door carefully, giving Thor a moment to adjust before extending the leash. He hesitated. His ears twitched, but finally stepped out, his paws touching the ground. As he sniffed the air, the footsteps of people around made him alert. He growled when he saw someone approaching to greet Akina. Her acquaintances were quite surprised to see Thor, but perhaps it was the look of disdain when they saw his ugly, scarred body, and he curled up in fear. Akina realized that she needed to quickly get him to her apartment, but still moved slowly so as not to startle him. Inside the simple but cozy apartment, a dog bed was in the corner near the living room window, and a set of bowls with clean water and pellets were waiting for Thor in the kitchen. Akina had spent the night before preparing the space to be as welcoming as possible, but when she took off the leash and let Thor explore, it was clear that he wasn't ready to settle down yet. Right now, he was padding around the apartment, his nose overworked as he checked every nook and cranny. His movements were stiff. His body was low to the ground, as if expecting danger to jump out at any moment. When he reached the dog bed, he took a short sniff before retreating to a corner near the door, curling up into a tight ball, his eyes still fixed on Akina. Watching her every move with cautious curiosity, Akina sighed, her chest tightening. She had expected this. She knew it would take time, but seeing Thor so withdrawn was harder than she had anticipated. She crouched down, keeping her voice soft. "It's okay, Thor. You're safe here. No one will hurt you." For a moment, his eyes softened, but he didn't move. Akina decided to give him space, retreating to the kitchen to prepare dinner. She hoped the smell of the food might lure him out of his shell. But when she returned with a plate of food for herself, Thor was still in the same place, curled up on the rug in the corner of the room. Over the next few days, a subtle routine began to form. Akina gave Thor as much space as he wanted, never forcing him to interact, but always letting him know she was there. She spent hours sitting quietly on the floor near his corner, watching dog care and training videos, allowing him to get used to her presence. Slowly, he began to relax, less tense, his eyes less alert. One evening, as Akina sat on the couch watching TV, she felt a slight pressure on her leg. She looked down and her heart stopped. Thor moved closer to her, his nose gently nudging her knee for a moment. She gently placed it on his fur. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Thor didn't back away. He stood there for a moment before retreating to his corner. But the connection had been made. For her, it was a big step forward. That night, Akina had trouble sleeping, lying in bed, imagining Thor's hellish life, the terrible battles he'd been through, the whips he'd been whipped with when he'd lost, the scars, the terrified eyes. Everything was a reminder of the endless pain. As she finally drifted off to sleep, she felt that Thor's journey had only just begun, and that together, they would face whatever lay ahead. Akina could feel Thor changing and his bond with her growing with each passing day. At first, it was just the slightest wag of his tail or the way he followed her at a safe distance. Every small victory felt huge, like a crack in the wall he'd built to protect himself. Patient as ever, Akina never pushed him, but would celebrate the smallest sign of progress. One evening, she almost cried when she saw him finally lie down on the dog bed she'd bought. He slept peacefully until the morning sun appeared. Akina decided it was time to take Thor for a walk. Holding up the leash, she asked, "What do you think, friend? Want to go for a walk?" Thor tilted his head, curious. Encouraged, she clipped the leash to the cord around Thor's neck and opened the door. Thor was cautious at first, but gradually relaxed, sniffing the air and breathing in the quiet neighborhood. Around the corner, they met a neighbor with a friendly golden retriever. Thor stiffened, but didn't panic like usual. He just backed away. Akina praised him gently, and he approached the bedside as if his fear of another dog attacking him had disappeared. Early the next morning, Akina takes Thor for a walk when she notices two strange men following her. On a deserted stretch of road, they suddenly attack, trying to kidnap Thor. At first, Thor cowers behind Akina, too scared to react. But when he sees that she is in real danger, he begins to growl, then lunges forward to protect her. Frightened by his fierce defense, the two men panic, bumping into each other so clumsily that one loses a shoe before running away without looking back. Akina is shocked to realize that they might come back for Thor. Needing help, she calls John, her friend, and a local policeman. Hearing her frightened voice, John reassures her that he is patrolling nearby and will be there shortly. 7 minutes later, he arrives and searches for any evidence the men may have left behind. At first, he found nothing, until Thor barked at the fence, revealing a single shoe lying there. Suspecting that the attackers were part of a dogfighting operation that Thor had escaped from, John stuck the shoe under Thor's nose. Thor sniffed, barked a few times, and ran off in the direction of the two strangers. Akina and John immediately followed Thor in their car. A moment later, Thor headed down a winding dirt road that led to an abandoned farm in the distance. John called for help from his team at headquarters, and a few moments later, 11 police officers arrived, and together they walked silently into the abandoned farm. John and his team searched, but found no trace of the criminal. Thor continued his search until he came to an unusually clean-looking fireplace, sniffed, and barked. John, with his expertise, guessed that Thor had found a clue. He touched the fireplace, used his arm to push hard, unexpectedly revealing a hidden door leading down the stairs. As they descended into the dimly lit basement, they discovered rows of rusty metal cages filled with frightened dogs. In the distance, several men were engrossed in an illegal dogfight. John and his support team quickly intervened, fired warning shots, and subdued all involved. The men were handcuffed and taken to the police car. Immediately, Akina ran to hug Thor. "You are a hero," she said with a tearful voice. From this moment, she knew that he had overcome the wall of fear to protect her. That night, returning to the peaceful small apartment, Akina lay down on the sofa watching YouTube. Another familiar image caught her eyes. Not Thor with the dull eyes before, but him with the strong, brave image in the video titled, "Hero Thor overcomes the fear from the past, saves his fellow human beings." The video had millions of views and many likes and many comments praising Thor's bravery. Akina was moved, not expecting that a small action of hers had saved the soul of the dog about to be injected with euthanasia, helping it defeat the very world that had tried to defeat it. Akina posted lying next to Thor. She was imagining you liking and commenting on this story, the story about the journey to rescue Thor, a dog overcoming its own fate. Thor, the dog wants to send you a final message. Hurry up and press the subscribe button. Subscribe to the channel now. Thank you very much. Have a good day.